few upfront matters as well. We are spotlighting the ASL interpreters today for accessibility best practices. For folks on a computer who like to have multiple speakers alongside the presentation, go to View Options and have you can see side-by-side mode under View Options. And you can also select the gallery view. Zoom is changing a lot of things over time. Some are easier and some are less easy to adapt to. This webinar is being recorded. We'll be posting it later on disabilitycompendium.org website. This website is also where you can find the compendium, the annual report, the compendium supplement, the infographics, and state level reports that we will be talking about. If you did not request a copy by mail, you can also, they're supposedly going live this morning. I'm hoping that happened. I was teaching this morning, so I didn't have a chance to see whether the website was updated. I'm waiting for a text to say, yes, of course they were.
It was.
Yes, okay, there's the speaker from on high. This website will also where you can find today's slides as well as speaker bios for all the speakers throughout the course of the conference. As an attendee of this webinar, you are a viewer. To ask questions, go to the Q&A box on your webinar screen and type your questions into the box. Speakers will have the potential of seeing it. They may potentially answer on the fly, but we will have a Q&A session where we will be, the moderators and I will help review the questions and speak to them as well. If you have any questions, you can email us at disability.statistics@unh.edu or the toll-free number 866-538-9521 if you're interested in more information. I'm going to turn it over to the moderator, which is me. I'm going to go back up to the front slide. Welcome, everybody. To the Annual Disability Statistics Compendium. We're going to start calling it the Annual Disability Statistics Conference. This was initially, a morning session on Capitol Hill where we would release the compendium. We've since expanded our products to include the annual report, the compendium supplement, infographics, all of which we'll talk about today. But we've also expanded it to be a full day conference. Of course, in Zoom times, we can't have the 4 sessions in person. So what we've done is we've decided to break it up into small bits at noontime Eastern for an hour and 15-minute sessions. Instead of having 4 sessions all at one day and having lunch, which we've been doing for the last almost 20 years, I think, in various forms and shapes. We're going to just break it up and do Zoom days, noontime Eastern web conferences, just webinars like this one. So we're going to have 4 days, all at noontime. We're going to talk about the annual report. We're going to do the statistics today, all the products. Day 2, tomorrow at noon, will be our federal partners, federal data collection agencies. We'll talk about the latest things that are going on, particularly related to COVID. On day 3, we'll have the impact of COVID, and we'll have a set of speakers talking about COVID-related data that are coming out, that are starting to come out, and understanding the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on people with disabilities. And then on day 4, we'll have speakers speaking to disability and African-American population. We'll hear from folks from Langston University as well as present the results of an infographic that we will be publishing every year going forward. With that, let me just before I turn it over to Phil Beatty from NIDILRR for a few moments from him, let me just talk a little bit about kind of what we're hoping to accomplish. From my viewpoint, statistics are a really powerful tool. They're a tool in science and in research. They're a tool in advocacy, policymaking, and program administration. They're also, an important source of identity. When we first started compiling statistics related to disability back when I was at Cornell, there was really there was no annual source of statistics. There was something called the Annual Statistical Abstract of the United States. And the Statistical Abstract was this big book that sat behind reference librarians. It's discontinued. It was put out by the Department of Commerce. of the United States, and it had over 1,000 tables, and not once did the word disability or disabled or handicapped, none of those terms ever showed. This was a long time ago, so there were older terms. None of those terms showed up. There were no tables dedicated to people with disabilities, or the programs, the federal or state programs related to disability. Out of 1,000 tables, there was not one. So that really led us to build a statistical abstract like the Compendium. And over time, there are all kinds of data that we're trying to put in. There's population-based data and statistics. There's program-based statistics. Increasingly, statistics, although where they may not appear in the Compendium, are being used in business analytics. I'm sitting in the middle of a business school, and business analytics is going gangbusters in terms of the use of data. And if we don't have measures of disability in the data sources that are being measured or being collected, then it's really hard to promote the lives of people with disabilities, to do research, to do policymaking and advocacy, if we don't have the measures of disability, identifying the population alone, let alone aspects that are specific to people with disabilities. So we'll be talking a lot about the data sources throughout the conference, and really trying to come together as a community to advance the world of disability statistics. Of course, we couldn't do this without our funding from the National Institute on Independent Living and Disability National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, NIDILRR. And we're going to hear now from Phil Beatty for a few minutes. Take it away, Phil. Hello?
Okay, very good. Thank
Hi,
you,
Phil.
Andrew. I was just able to unmute myself, and I
There you go.
believe to start my video. So yes, thank you, Andrew, and hello, everyone. Good morning to those of you in the time zones to the west, and good afternoon to those of you in the Eastern time zone. As it has been for the last couple of years, it's my real pleasure to welcome everyone to this important event. Welcome on behalf of all of my colleagues at the Administration for Community Living and the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, or NIDILRR. I want to start my words of welcome by thanking the Research and Training Center on Disability Statistics and Demographics. Each year, the Disability Statistics RRTC systematically pulls together data from every available source to produce this strong core of national, state, and county level disability information. As a result of that solid and systematic work each year, the Compendium is a central source of really good data about and for people with disabilities across the country. The Compendium really is centralized informational infrastructure, as Andrew said, for people with disabilities, for disability advocates, service providers, policymakers, researchers, and all kinds of other stakeholders across the country. So at the same time, the rollout of the Disability Statistics Compendium each year is a real opportunity to discuss and prioritize pressing topics related to disability measurement, analysis, and reporting. To make this point really clearly, let's just reflect back to last year's Compendium rollout. Exactly 1 year ago, many of us were gathered for this event in a large meeting room in a hotel near the Capitol. Many of us had flown in for the event from places all around the country. We were sitting shoulder to shoulder. We were giving each other welcoming hugs and handshakes. We really had little idea of the coming national public health emergency and pandemic that we'd all soon enter, and the implications of the pandemic for our lives and for our shared work. Also, a year ago, we didn't know the names Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. Their killings, among so many others that came before, served as catalysts for nationwide and international demands for racial justice and racial equity. These have quickly and importantly become the defining events and experiences of our time. And within the context of these public health and social justice imperatives, the RRTC has put together an excellent program of presentations and discussions. They've invited experts from across the field to present and discuss disability measurement and statistics work that pushes our shared agenda forward. As Andrew just described, many of the presentations will focus on COVID's impact on people with disabilities. Others will focus on social inequities among people with disabilities by race. And many of the presentations will combine both of these topics in important ways. So really, thank you to everyone on the RRTC team for pulling together this key data infrastructure as you do each year. And really, thank you for rolling it out to us through a thoughtful set of panels and presentations and discussions. So with those thanks, really, I'd like to welcome and thank all of our federal colleagues and disability researchers for being part of this important program. On the program this week, I'm looking forward to hearing from experts from the Census Bureau, the CDC's National Center for Health Statistics, as well as the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Office of Disability Employment Policy from within the Department of Labor. We'll also hear a presentation from an HHS colleague from the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation. And of course, we welcome and we recognize all of the excellent statistical and analytical expertise from the University of New Hampshire and Langston University and Mathematica. So we really want you to consider this data rollout as part of an ongoing discussion with us toward high quality data and analytical information that we can all use to promote and advance strong, positive health, employment, and community living outcomes among people with disabilities. So to the extent that the technology allows us, please engage with the presenters during the panels this week and in the weeks and the months to come. So with that, Andrew, I'm going to turn it back over to you now and the RRTC team to get us started on the data presentations. So really, thanks again for all of the excellent work that you're doing and for the excellent program that's to come now and for the rest of this week.
Okay, great. Thank you, Phil. I appreciate it. Phil is the research director at the Institute. Phil and I were flying on a plane about 20 years ago, going to a site visit when I first met Phil. It's great to hear from you, Phil, and thanks to everybody at NIDILRR. We'll be hearing a lot of NIDILRR folks will be the moderators coming forward. And so you'll see NIDILRR folks sprinkled throughout the next 4 days. All right, so I am the moderator of the first session, and so you're going to see me quite a bit today. Today we're going to hear from folks around the annual report, which I'll do, the Compendium, which Shreya will do. Marisa and Megan will talk about our state reports and infographics, and then we'll hear from Stacie about the Compendium of methods, a compilation of methods related to data collection that Mathematica has produced for the center. All right, I'm going to just go ahead and share my screen and jump into it. We're a little bit behind. I am going to share my screen. All right, so the annual report. So the compendium we've been doing for a long time, but in recent years, we've added the annual report. And the annual report is really, in the most recent years, has taken on the focus of looking at time trends over time. So this is work with me and Marisa Rafal. Marisa. Okay, now let's get the page down to go. There we go. So the goals of the annual report are to ensure a presence for people with disability in the context of social and economic progress. We're going to be tracking year to year key indicators relating to the size of the population with disabilities, the economic well-being and overall well-being of people with disabilities, and the contribution of the environment to the enablement/disablement process. We'll also be trying to make a call about, did it go up or down from last year? Now, of course, we don't have yet data for 2020 from the primary sources of data that are used in the compendium and the annual report, which is the American Community Survey. So this, next year will be very, very telling, because that's when we'll have the first kind of COVID impact for a lot of the indicators that we can track. On Thursday, we'll have the panel that goes over what existing data we do have on the COVID pandemic. We'll also be looking at statistical significance. This is being able to make the call. We have to actually look at statistical significance to see whether our sample, we are able to detect whether there's an increase or a decrease. We don't have the population statistics for the entire population of the United States, but we have a sample, a very big sample in the American Community Survey. Sometimes we can detect changes, sometimes we can't. Sometimes the changes are small and they're harder to detect. Note that this is not the same as meaningfulness. Meaningfulness is for you to decide, for people to decide, for expert panels to decide what is a meaningful change. First, we have to see whether it's due to a sample, it's sampling variation or not. Once statistical significance is determined, the meaningfulness of it needs to be discussed in a broader context. We'll also focus on gaps and the changing gaps between people with and without disability. We do gaps just as the straight difference between people with and without disabilities. You can do it in terms of ratios, which is in some aspects better, but from a knowledge translation perspective, people really want to know what's the change in things from one year to the next. Let's talk about a summary of the results from this year. A summary over much like 2017 to 18, there wasn't a great deal of change between 18 and 19. Of course, we probably expect a lot of change between 19 and 2020. Except for a few things. There was an increase in the size of the US population with disabilities percentage-wise. This is likely due to aging of the population. There is a narrowing of the employment gap. This was actually seen if you follow the NTIDE report, NTIDE, the NTIDE report with Kessler Foundation and AUCD that we do at UNH. That we've seen there was a narrowing of the employment gap. We see that in the current population survey. We also see it in the American Community Survey. This is when the economy was at full employment. We're chugging along, and this is all pre-COVID. There was also a narrowing of the recent construction gap between people with and without disabilities. This is one thing we tried to look at, the relationship of the environment and the potential for people with disabilities living in older housing. So that gap between people with and without disabilities, people with disabilities typically live in older forms of housing. That gap has changed and narrowed. And then we have something called the Disablement Index, which has increased. And this is the percentage of people with hearing, vision, cognitive, and mobility difficulty, the degree to which they report having difficulty going outside home on errands. And so the difficultiness of and this is why it's called the Disablement Index. It's the degree to which the environment appears to be influencing ability to go outside home alone and run errands. We also, many of the gaps that we compared between, one thing to note is that if you go back to 2008, the first year we have the data, many of these gaps have statistical significantly changed. And that's something you can go to the compendium for. So here's a listing of, this is a bit of a shock, but these are all the indicators that we currently have. One shout out is to the National Organization on Disability, NCD, the National Council on Disability, sorry, NOD, the National Council on Disability. The National Council on Disability has a really great report that's, probably about 12 years old now. Yeah, 11 or 12 years, that looked at indicators. If we were tracking progress, what would we track based on available data? And many of these indicators were cited in that report by NCD as being important to track. We're looking to add more indicators, and we're thinking about adding indicators, but these are the indicators that we're looking at. So we're simply looking at the percentage of people with disabilities. Then we're looking at the gap between living in institutions. We don't have a good measure that's publicly available for the number of people living in institutions. I would go to the University of Minnesota, our colleagues there, for that kind of information. We have the high school gap, the college gap, the employment gap, the earnings from work gap among full-time workers. We have the poverty gap, health insurance gap, the private health insurance gap, the mass transit to work gap. So that's kind of getting at people's access to public transportation, whether they're living in an area that has access to public transportation. The age of housing, that recency thing that we're talking about, and then the disablement index. Way over here on the right side, you can see, you can see the ones that increase. So there was an increase from 13.1 to 13.2, a decrease in the employment gap, and a decrease in the recency of when homes were built, and the disablement index increased. And I think we're getting short on time, so I just want to kind of point out, all these trends. We have charts in the annual report. Many of you have asked for, and we've mailed you the annual report, but it's really, are we making progress? I think that's really up to all of us to kind of look through the data to make that. I don't want to be the only one, or, I don't think it really rests in any one person or any group of people to make sense of whether we're making progress, whether the change in these indicators indicate progress. I will say, I'm just going to point to one thing that, as an economist, that I would look to, and that is we saw a decrease in the employment gap over the last few years when the economy was doing well and we were in full employment, but we're still not back to, we're not too far away. The gap between people with and without disabilities is still pretty much where it was back in 2008 when the first time. Also, over this time of decreasing employment gap, we didn't see the poverty gap to change. This is the percentage point difference between people with and without disabilities, and we really didn't see a change in the degree to which there's a differential poverty gap between people with and without disabilities. So I think there was improvement, but I don't think it's been widespread or necessarily impacted the way people are living. With that, I'm just going to our quick contact information where you can get the annual report, also the monthly NTIDE report you can get at our webpage, disabilityresearch.org, and then just some personal information. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues. Who's up next, everybody? I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to turn it over to, I think, Shreya's next. Right, Shreya? I have the thing on my phone.
Thank you, Andrew.
Take it away, Shreya. Shreya is new to us this year. Welcome, Shreya. And she has led the effort to build the compendium. So take it away, Shreya.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay. So hello everyone, my name is Shreya Paul and I'm a project director at the Institute on Disability, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the virtual release of the 2020 Annual Disability Statistics Compendium. So through this presentation today, I'll be describing the need and the purpose of the compendium, introduce the compendium content and features, how to access the compendium and technical assistance if you may need it, and finally describe a few uses of the compendium. Disability statistics, as we all know, are often difficult to find in the United States, and if found, they are often scattered across multiple sources. Through the compendium and the supplement, we aim to provide a comprehensive compilation of these statistics all in one place. Our number one goal is to bridge the gap between the producers and the consumers of disability statistics, and to do so in an accessible and timely fashion. These are some of our current products. The Annual Disability Statistics Compendium and its supplement. These two products provide estimates on different indicators such as prevalence of disability in the United States, employment, poverty, earnings, housing, industry and occupation, and so on. The annual report on people with disabilities in America, as Andrew described it, it tracks the progress of people with disabilities using key social and economic indicators. Next, we have the state reports with county level data, on which my colleague Megan Henly will expand on, but these reports are available if you want to look at county level data on prevalence, employment, and poverty. Currently, we just have these three topics. And finally, we have the infographics, which are quite popular among our products. And this year we have two of those. The first one on rural people with disabilities, and the second one on African American people with disabilities. So this is how our products look this year. We have both the HTML and PDF format for all of these, and our team works really, really hard to make all of these comprehensive, accessible, reliable, and timely. If you want to download our products, request copies by mail, or contact us with any questions or for technical assistance, please visit www.disabilitycompendium.org. Fun fact here, between September 2019 and September 2020, our products were downloaded as many as 8,186 times. So that's a big number. So for the compendium, supplement, and annual report, we pull our data from a number of data sources. Some of them are listed on this slide. One of our major data sources, American Community Survey. We use their public use microdata sample files, or the PUMS files, and their 5-year estimates. Their 5-year estimates are generally used for the state reports with county level data, and it is also used by University of Montana, who collaborate with us for the rural section of the compendium. The next data source is Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, or BRFIS, and we use this data source to report estimates on risky behaviors such as obesity, smoking, and binge drinking. We also report estimates on various incomes and benefits received by people with disabilities, and these data are obtained from Social Security Administration, SSA, or Veterans Benefit Administration, VBA. Another report that we produce is on the vocational rehabilitation services received by people with disabilities, and that data is obtained from Rehabilitation Services Administration, or the RSA website. These are some of the topics covered in the compendium and the supplement. The population size, prevalence, disability type. Currently, we report 6 major disability types: hearing, vision, ambulatory, cognitive, self-care, and independent living disability. We also report estimates by demographic characteristics, that is age, race, and sex. The other estimates include health insurance, risky behavior, as I said before, employment, earnings, poverty, SSDI, SSI, special education services from the IDEA Act and their outcomes, and many more. So there have been a few changes this year. For example, till the previous year, we calculated different estimates for different age groups. For example, for functionality, we used the age group 21 to 64 years. For housing, we calculated it for age group 15 plus. But this year, for increasing the consistency of our reporting, we have based most of our calculations for the age group 18 to 64 years. The second change that is there in this year's products is that for reporting employment and poverty, till last year, we used Census Bureau's 1-year estimates, but we have calculated all those estimates using the PUMS data files this year. So you can expect that the estimates are based on an edited sample. Though we do not have any brand new section in the compendium this year, these are some of our newer sections which were introduced just last year. These are functioning, industry and occupation, home environment, and rural. Moving on to the next section, which is about using the compendium. As Andrew pointed out, statistics are a powerful tool, and it is often used as a decision-making tool and very often used to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of a policy and program. Many a times doing just a quick visualization can help us make inferences about the current situation. Let's see an example here. This is a map which shows the prevalence of disability in various states in the United States in 2019 for the age group 18 to 64. As we can see, Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, these states have the highest percentage of people with disabilities, whereas the bigger states like New York, California, and Texas have one of the lowest percentage of people with disabilities. So knowing the size, composition, and geographic location of population with disability, it's very important to support the allocation of public funds to public programs. And if we do such visualizations for, say, employment, health, poverty, we can make inferences about which states the government needs to expand the opportunities. So that was one of the example of how we can use the data that is there in our compendium and the supplement. Moving on to the next slide, it's about our ongoing efforts. We are continuously trying to include new sections in the compendium. One of the sections that we are currently talking about is the mental health and substance use by people with disabilities, even if we can only get hold of national level data at this moment. We also want to expand the state reports with county level data. Currently, we have just 3 topics, prevalence, poverty, and employment, but we are looking to expand it to more topics. Infographics, again, very popular products. We want to produce more of them. And finally, make the reports and the website more user-friendly and accessible going forward. So that was it. If you have any questions, particularly for me, please reach me at shreya.paul@unh.edu. And if you need any technical assistance or have a general question for the team, please reach us at disability.statistics@unh.edu. Thank you very much for joining us today. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them after the session. I will now invite my colleague Megan Henly, who will do a presentation on state reports with county level data. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Shreya. Just going to share some slides here. My name is Megan Henly. I am also part of the Stats RTC team at the University of New Hampshire. And so I'm going to just describe a little bit about the third in these series of updated data products, the state reports with county level data. I'm just going to give a brief overview to let you know what you can expect to find in these reports, and I'll show a couple of graphics that'll show how they may be of use. Now, all these data products are here to fill a need, and many are in response to requests that have been made of us in the past, or sometimes anticipating what people could use based on our conversations with data users. So if you want to provide evidence about the size of a population you serve, or evidence about the extent of a disparity by disability status, then these products are all here to fill that need, but we have different products for different needs, as Shreya was just describing. So the first two presentations, we just had the compendium and supplement, and that's showing the most recent figures for what's happening at the national level and at the state level. And earlier, Andrew highlighted the annual report, and that's great for showing trends over time at the national level. So what's changing and what's improving. But, if you are interested in local level issues, if you're doing issues specific to a state, you want to know about county level variation or what's local to your community, then those national level numbers might not be particularly useful to you, because keeping in mind that's a midpoint, right? And if your particular local area is in maybe one of the tails of that distribution, it might not give you the best picture of what's happening. So that's really the goal of what the state reports are doing. These are some of the same tables that you'll find in the compendium, but they have data reproduced for every county in every state. So the most recent reports that we have available use data from the American Community Survey 5-year estimates. The 2019 data were just released late last year, and so these reports were just produced just in the last several weeks. So they have the most recent data that's available. Each state, as Shreya mentioned, each state has 3 reports available. There's one that describes disability prevalence, one on employment by disability status, and one for poverty by disability status. So again, these topics, they're in response to data users' needs, and we're hoping to expand upon these and provide additional reports in future years. So if you have a particular topic, especially one that you see in the compendium, some of them we may not be able to have state level data just based on the availability of the reporting, but many of them we can do. And so we'd love to hear what's of use to you in your local community. If it's not something we'll produce for next year, it's definitely something we can respond to and give you that data for the area of interest to you. Just be in touch with us. So what you can expect to find in these reports, you'll find the summary tables, just as you'll see in the compendium report, but we also have some heat maps, which are useful. I have a couple of examples that I just threw up here just to provide some context so you can think about how to view and interpret these. So this first example here is showing from the Disability Prevalence Report. This is a heat map for the state of Maryland, and it's showing the percentage of people with disabilities by county. And so you'll see the lightest color blues have the lowest prevalence. In this case, it's under 9%. And the darkest blues have the highest percentage, and that's 15.7% or higher when you're looking at Maryland. And so when you see a map like this, you can kind of quickly understand that, for the most part, we see kind of low rates of disability prevalence throughout the state, but then 2 counties at opposite ends of the state really stand out as having higher levels of disability prevalence. One is in the upper Northwest, that's Allegheny County, and then along the Eastern Shore, there's Dorchester County. Now, if I show you disability prevalence, instead of looking at the percentage, we look at the count, we see quite a different picture. So this is looking at number of people instead of a percentage. And you see the counties with the largest number of people with disabilities are concentrated in the areas around the District of Columbia and Baltimore, areas that are more densely populated overall. So I just noted we had a live question that was asking about how we can use results, particularly the state level reports, to talk to like local level legislators to, you know, provide better opportunities for people with disabilities was the question. So, I mean, really, you know, this is just looking at disability prevalence. I also have, you know, data on disability employment and poverty. If you're looking to kind of think about disparities, you might want to look at the percentages, like, and this is where you're going to be able to highlight and see where the differences are the greatest between people with and without disabilities. If you're looking at maybe where you want to make the greatest impact, where the largest number of people are, you might want to look at these counts, the heat maps with the counts, and focus in on those. So we would love to have like a, you know, a bigger conversation with anybody who has specific requests about how to tailor the data to address a need. Sometimes having these reports available to you are useful as starting points to see just what data is available. But if you're not sure, you know, what you need, we're always open to kind of filling that data need, because our goal is to provide the information to answer those questions. So I just wanted to provide these as kind of a brief overview of what you'd expect. We would really love your feedback if you're using these about how they've been in use. So we'd love to be in contact with you about that. But in the meantime, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Marisa Rafal, who would like to highlight a different data product.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm Marisa. I work at the Institute on Disability, and I'm really excited to present the updated numbers for this year's rural infographic. If you could advance the slide. Thank you. So just as kind of a background, the Statistics and Demographics ROTC team will make a new infographic each year and will update the previous ones. So this shows the updated numbers for the first one in this series, which was US Rural Disability Statistics. On Friday, the new one will be released, and that's Disability Infographic, Social Inequities Experienced by African Americans. So on the screen, this shows the updated numbers for the 2014 to 2018 ACS 5-year data. That's where this came from. Last year, it went up to 2017. And on the left is just kind of a screenshot of the infographic that if you requested it, you may have received by mail, or it might be on its way to you. Just as some definitions before we jump in, urban counties are referred to as metropolitan, and those have an urban core of 50,000 or more people, while rural counties are micropolitan with an urban core of 10,000 to 50,000, and non-core counties have no urban core, less than 10,000 people. So the kind of biggest takeaway from all the sections in the infographic were that in more rural places, disparities widen. So when looking at prevalence, what we found was that disability prevalence goes up the more rural a place becomes. So metropolitan or urban counties had a 12% disability prevalence rate, going up to 15.8% in micropolitan counties, and then going up again to 17.9% in non-core counties, or those most rural counties. Also, with poverty rate, 1 in 4 people with disabilities in the most rural places experience poverty, compared to only 1 in 5 in the most urban places. And again, this is a fraction on an infographic, so if you want kind of the concrete percentages, they're in the rural section of your disability compendium. With health insurance, we found that in more rural places, people with disabilities reported lower rates of private insurance and higher rates of public insurance. And finally, with employment, we found that the employment rate for people with disabilities ages 18 to 64 went down as places became more rural. So there was an employment rate for people with disabilities 18 to 64 of 36.8% in metropolitan counties, going down to 33.1% in micropolitan counties, and then down again to 30.7% in those non-core, most rural counties. So that's just kind of a broad overview, and we'd like to give a huge thank you to our collaborators at the University of Montana's RTC Rural. Just a huge shout out to them. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. disability.statistics@unh.edu will get to us, as well as you can email me directly, marisa.rafal@unh.edu, or Megan, who gave your previous presentation, megan.henly@unh.edu. So with that, I will pass the virtual mic to Stacie Feldman from Mathematica.
Hello, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Great. Well, thank you for providing me with the opportunity to present the Compendium of Disability Data Collection Methods. Before I begin, I'd like to thank NIDILRR for funding this project. Also, I want to acknowledge the Compendium's co-authors, Jason Markusich and William Rafferty. As many of you know, it's critical for organizations involved in quantitative and qualitative data collection efforts to consider the extent to which their methods create barriers to participation for people with disabilities. However, there are few available resources to address this problem. To fill this knowledge gap, Mathematica created the Compendium of Disability Data Collection Methods.
Stacie, I'm just going to pause you real quick. We're not seeing your screen right now.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No worries.
How about now?
Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Oh gosh.
It happens.
Okay. Sorry, one second. So the Compendium is an easily accessible source of research on the methodological issues associated with collecting data from or about people with disabilities. It includes 441 links to references from 2012 to 2020 that summarize analyses of methodological experiments, papers, and presentations that discuss challenges and best practices for collecting data from people with disabilities, and systematic reviews of various screening and measurement tools. We view the Compendium as a living document. We continue to gather references throughout the year. We publish an updated version of the document each year to coincide with the release of the annual Disability Statistics Compendium. Here are the broad subject areas that the Compendium covers. Each of these subject areas are further broken down by subtopics. For example, under disability impairment type, subtopics include aging and later life disabilities, developmental, intellectual, and cognitive impairments, as well as sensory, communication, physical, and psychological impairments. Data collection subtopics include adaptive technologies, proxies, inclusive strategies and participatory action research, interviewing techniques, and qualitative methods. The special population subtopics are youth with disabilities and veterans. We recently added references to 3 ongoing national surveys: American Community Survey, Current Population Survey, and National Health Interview Survey. The entries are ordered alphabetically within each subject, and most include a URL so that users can retrieve the publication. We place the references in all applicable categories. Therefore, many of them are indexed under more than one subject. To create the Compendium, we conduct a literature search each year on the topics that I just described. We obtain articles from a host of online journal sources, social science resources, conference presentations, and working papers and dissertations. After completing the literature search, we apply eligibility criteria to further specify which references we should include in the compendium. We include resources that discuss, examine, or test methods used to collect data from people with disabilities. We do not include references or articles that primarily focus on analyses or findings from survey data. We consider publications and presentations from all over the world. We screen out any articles for which the full text is not available or accessible, or published in a language other than English. And due to time and resource constraints, due to time and resource constraints, we do not evaluate the methodological quality of the references. We added 110 new references to this release of the compendium for a total of 441 entries. We wanted to just give you a flavor of some of the research questions that are addressed in the articles and references we added to this year's compendium. There's a lot of interesting material. For example, focusing on the first bullet, Elizabeth Cridland and colleagues provide recommendations about conducting in-depth interviews with people with dementia. Topics discussed include interview guide preparation, recruitment, obtaining consent and assent, conducting effective interviews, analysis and interpretation of data, and effective communication of research findings. In particular, they noted that providing strategies to support interviewees with the symptoms of dementia, such as repetition and rephrasing of questions, developing single-faceted interview questions, and the use of visual prompts are key to developing interview guides. And here are a few more research questions. Focusing on the first bullet, my Mathematica colleague, Jessie Chandler, tested the feasibility of collecting web survey data from a sample of state vocational rehabilitation VR applicants, inviting non-respondents to complete a telephone interview. People who lacked internet access were provided with a mobile device and wireless access, and were as likely to complete the web surveys as people who already had internet access. Respondents who elected to complete the survey online versus by telephone differed in level of education and VR experience. These findings suggest that for disability studies, web surveys are an important supplement to, but not a replacement for, traditional data collection efforts. To access the compendium, it will appear on the Disability Compendium website after this event, and it is currently available on the Mathematica website at this link. For more information, please contact my co-author, Jason Markusich, or myself. And thank you to University of New Hampshire, NIDILRR, ACL, and the US Department of Health and Human Services. Thank you. And back to Andrew.
Great, thank you, Stacie. All right, let's get back up and running, and we got a lot of Q&A. Thank you all for staying on time. I've been sad to say I haven't listened to my colleagues, but I have been answering things on Q&A. So if you've never been to the Disability Statistics Compendium event on live, for many years we've tried to expand and have as much Q&A as possible, which is why we're going over an hour today and going on to the next 15 minutes. We've got lots of people asking questions. We will stay on afterwards to answer questions after we close down. Let me share my screen, and then I'm going to start going through some of the questions. Some of the questions we've already answered. If you're interested, there's a lot of very interesting questions that have been asked and answered. Let me first share my screen so that we get the information up there. Oh, I did it again. When you go too far, it stops sharing. I'm just gonna leave it on that view. All right, so thank you to all the presenters. You can find the compendium at disabilitycompendium.org. You can also find things at researchondisability.org. And thank you to NIDILRR. Let's go ahead and start the Q&A section. And I think you'll actually see a black box when I go to the Q&A.
Andrew, I
Let's
think
see.
we were
Yep.
gonna have people turn on their cameras and stop screen share for the Q&A.
All right.
All right.
That sounds good. Now you get to see all of us. So I'm going to go through a couple of the ones that we've already answered. A couple people have raised the issue around needing more specificity. So looking at different age breakdowns, race, gender, ethnicity. Some of those you can find in the Compendium supplement. The Compendium supplement was designed to the Compendium supplement was designed to put out more breakdowns because people were asking for them. We also, as I believe Megan mentioned, we have the ability, much of this data we have at our fingertips and can re-estimate using different age breakdowns or race, gender. We're certainly, if people are interested and really need a very specific kind of information, we're happy to do that. Also for the U.S. territories and the Virgin Islands, the Commonwealths. Oh boy, so the American Community Survey does have some of that. Certainly Puerto Rico is well represented in a lot of the data sources. Some of the other territories, not so much. Give us a call. We may be able to help you out and find what you need. The idea of onset. So it was raised that, a lot of these are working age and we don't necessarily know whether people acquired it in later ages, particularly with employment, the employment of people who perhaps acquired the disability during an occupational incident, right? An accident, on the job accident, or maybe very different from people who had a disability since birth and went through the education system and into the labor market already having their disability. Unfortunately, a lot of the disability data sources do not have, almost all of them are pretty limited in their ability to look at disability onset. Someone raised the issue of rare conditions. Low incidence disabilities, low prevalence disabilities, rare diseases. The compendium and a lot of the work, we've always focused on things that are annually updated and available at state levels. That's where low incidence rare conditions don't fit well within our current kind of mindset. But certainly we could add them on the national level and then, update them whenever they're updated. I mean, that's the issue. They are rare conditions. They many times are not asked about in the data that the surveys and information we have. So I think that would be something, Shreya, that we could look at next year. We did provide tables for the survey of income and program participation, but when that didn't get updated after several years, we dropped it. That was annual data that got more detailed, not necessarily rare diseases, but more detailed functional limitations and conditions. There was a question, a good one, on the provision of standard errors, of confidence intervals, margins of error. We do impose a sample size restriction that that kind of a minimum sample size, but that sometimes still isn't enough. And you could get big jumps, particularly for small areas, like say Wyoming or Rhode Island, small areas, you could get big jumps from year to year. That's simply due to sample variation. And you know, from an advocacy perspective, that could lead you down a road that's not appropriate. We've had this issue years and years ago. The census had this issue, not with anything that we produced, but there was an issue where the city of Chicago went from, like, you know, 400,000, or went from 1 million people with disabilities to half that. I forget exactly the number. And people were really concerned about that. And uh, that was an issue. So we continue to struggle and try to figure out ways to disseminate confidence intervals. Now with the ability to produce things online faster, that's certainly something that we'll reconsider our strategy around that, because, you know, are our sample size restrictions sufficient or not? A lot of folks have asked about data on children. So when I used to kind of take lots of calls and requests for disability data, there were 3 areas. There was location, so state specific. People were really interested in state specific. That's one reason why the compendium is focused on states so much. There was disability specific, and then there was data on children, right? And for many years, that was those are the big kind of requests that come in. Data on children is a really interesting one. There are several people who've asked about data on children. I'd have to say that the compendium is definitely, and it's partly due to data availability and partly due to looking at a lot of economic indicators. But we could do child poverty. You know, how many children with disabilities live in poverty? We could add more child-based statistics. We do have the IDEA data that is available, the IDEA meaning special education data. We have some of that data in the compendium. But, you know, some of the data sources that collect information on the population with disabilities are not great at collecting information for children with disabilities. You know, it's hard to know how families are responding to some of these questions when when they're answering these questions. But again, if you're interested in more specific, we can do technical assistance and provide some of these stats based on children. Developmental disabilities. So this is a big issue. And I think it was it last year or was it the year before, we focused our whole conference on statistics related to people with developmental disabilities. There is a big effort at the we're at nudge, somebody just nudged me. Some questions are to other panelists. All right, so I'm going to stop talking. I'll finish my question. If one of the other panelists wants to chime in, let me know. So get ready, Shreya, Megan, Stacie, and Marisa, and maybe even Phil. Let me finish up that one question. So a developmental disability. So there is at the Administration on Community Living, there's an Administration on Developmental Disability. There is a big effort to look at data collection around developmental disability. It's a very specific definition many times that people have in mind. The cognitive difficulty question, do you have difficulty learning, remember, or concentrating because of physical, mental, or emotional disability? Those kinds of questions are not necessarily focused on people with developmental disability. And so it's a major issue. Please contact us if you're interested in learning more. We can send you links to some of the reports that were produced by ACL. Okay, I'm going to turn it over. Anybody else want to answer a couple questions that are live?
Yeah, I would like to answer a question by Hernisa. So she says, looking at the percentage across states for driving policy could be risky as it does not account for the potentially larger number of people with disabilities in states like New York, Texas, and California. So when we calculate the percentage for, say, employment or poverty, our denominator is always people with disabilities in that state. So if we are saying that there are 25% people with disabilities employed in the state of California, we mean that 25% out of the entire people with disabilities in California. So yeah, I think, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, we stay away from reporting just sheer numbers. We provide the sheer numbers in the compendium, but when we start doing any kind of analysis, it's usually the percentage. And then we also look at the difference between with and without disability, especially say with employment, comparing some states who have better employment outcomes may be, you know, it may be unfair. And so we look at compare people with and without disabilities. Boy, ton of questions. We have 27 open questions. Anybody else want to take a question? I'm tired of talking.
This is Megan. I can pop in here. Let me see if I can find it again. There's a great question here asking about how we plan to incorporate data from the decennial census. And so I think that's a great question. And I don't know if anybody recalls filling out their census form. It would have been about a year ago now, almost. And there were actually no questions on disability in the decennial form this year. And so we've been using data from the American Community Survey, which is a survey that it's a sample survey. So it's unfortunate in that it does not actually count every single person, but it used representative sampling methods so that we can provide good estimates for many geographies. And it does capture disability, and it's more current. It's unfortunate we won't have the full population estimates, but we have current data, and it will be updated every year, which is a benefit of that. So I just saw that question. I thought I'd pop on there.
Yeah. I just saw a question about data related to depression. Certainly psychiatric illness or psychiatric disabilities are not very well represented in a lot of the data, products a lot of the surveys that we're using. It's been improving over the years. The Survey of Income and Program Participation, the SIP, is probably the best, most comprehensive national one, although it's not updated every year. It's updated roughly every 4 years. And so again, a lot of these are challenging. That same person asked, are there questions that are better than others? We have a whole set of research projects that look at the way that which disability-related questions are asked in surveys, and some are better than others. There's a fairly standard 6-question sequence that's asked in most federal data collection systems. There's also the Washington Group set of questions, which comes out of the United Nations, that is quite different. It addresses a lot of the same aspects of a person's lives, vision and hearing, but it allows Census Bureau and many other things say, yes, no, do you have something or do you not? The Washington Group has a scale that you can respond to, so that it's not just strictly yes, no. All right, anybody else want to take a question?
This one was kind of related. I saw it in the Q&A. It was referring to the infographics. Any thoughts of using a different definition of rural? The OMB definition may undercount the rural population. The Federal Office of Rural Health Policy may have a more useful definition for future analyses. And I imagine we'd have to talk it over with collaborators, but we do update these every year. So it would be something to consider, and it is tangentially related just because the way you count things and estimate them is going to kind of affect your products. So definitely something to consider, and you'll see on Friday that we pulled from several different sources for our other infographics. So they're definitely a compilation, and there is flexibility there. So
Yeah. one that popped up many times when you can look at the answers. There's some really fascinating questions we've been answering just by typing. Many people have talked about rural statistics. We have the rural section that we co-sponsor with the RTC at the University of Montana. They have a lot of great products, and I would point folks interested in rural related, transportation related statistics, go speak to our colleagues at the RTC at the University of Montana. It's the rural RTC. If you typed in disability research Montana rural, you'd find them. So Google's probably the best way to go. If we can't send you, or contact us and we'll send you their contact information.
And Andrew, I'll just pop in, just as Ender noted in the question and answer, he also commented with contact info for RTC Rural. So if anybody has it handy, it's also just RTC Rural at mso.umt.edu. And there's a phone number there as well. Yeah, lots of great role questions. And I just wanted to offer a quick comment on recent question. Somebody looking for data on higher education did not provide their name, but please, I would love to be in contact with you if you have specific questions. There is data in the compendium on educational attainment, but nothing on current post-secondary enrollment, but that's something that we are talking about right now and we are looking at. So we do have some data on that we can provide if you just let me know specifically what you're interested in.
Yeah, Kate just put it in the chat, I think, or somewhere. Some information about costs. Annette, what do you think, Annette? And some self-serving questions. Cost of disability related costs. We don't really have a good annual source of that. Actually, the medical expenditure panel survey would probably be the best. I'd love to see the consumer expenditure survey add the 6 questions. They should be, but that's the primary household expenditure survey in the United States. I'm not sure how they've gotten away with not complying with the ACA mandate to have, perhaps because it's not a health survey primarily. But the consumer expenditure survey would be that. Some folks have said, have we used data from various foundations, such as the United Cerebral Palsy Foundation? We typically steer clear of that, and only because we it has to be updated, has to be publicly available. The Developmental Disability Administration, if there's data that people think are, if it's available, on an annual basis, we'd love to do that. The 14C, someone asked about the employment. 14C, I just saw some really cool data. It's kind of hodgepodge data on the requests for 14C waivers and it could be done by state. It's this kind of cheesecloth Excel file that the Department of Labor puts out. I'm not sure how frequently it's updated, and that would be really cool to of course, by the time we get into the compendium, 14C might be gone. So 14C is the minimum wage exemption for people working in certain disability related employment centers. Anybody else want to take a question?
I would like to take a question by Joseph Barry, and he wants to know about the intersectionality of the data that we have in compendium and the supplement. So currently we do have race, gender, age by disability type. For example, we do report on race by disability type, white Hispanic population with hearing disability or cognitive disability, and so on. But this space can be explored more, and that is one of the notes that I would make for next year.
All right, we are coming right up at 1:15. I am going to close. We will stay on to try to answer some of these live. So whoever's running the show, you can stop recording, but leave it open so that we can answer some of these questions that are still going. And people can feel free to stay on to look at whether their questions are answered or not. With that, I'm going to thank all our speakers. I'm going to thank Phil Beatty from NIDILRR. And I want to remind everybody that we have our session tomorrow. Tomorrow at noontime Eastern. We're going to be hearing from our federal data collection partners. And there's been a lot going on with data collection and adjusting to COVID life because the Census Bureau, when it sends people out or calls people, has to do, address the changing environment that COVID has really kind of impacted us all. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye and we're going to stop recording. Thank you all. There's also an evaluation survey. I keep forgetting to plug the evaluation survey. You would get it on the way out if you take our survey. It's available at disabilitycompendium.org. And that's where you can provide input on things that we should possibly include in the future as we expand the compendium and all our other products. All right, thank you very much, everybody. Hopefully I'll kind of see you tomorrow, quote unquote, on the next webcast. Thank you, bye-bye.